What's up, and welcome back to Nowstalgia Pod, giving you your weekly look at what's going on in pop culture. Almost out of quarantine, I'd say. Where some places are close, some places not so close. But Dave, been a couple weeks. How you doing?
Doing well, man. We are rejoicing for this great bounty of content from the gods. The content miners hit a new pocket of rich culture to discuss, partially because we didn't actually do anything new last week, so that always helps. But we'll see how long this lasts as the production delays continue. Yet, there's a lot of good stuff this week, including things that are not new at all, like Hamilton.
Yeah, and that's probably a good place to start. Hamilton dropped, the Hamill film dropped on Disney Plus, a live recording of the original cast performing the Broadway sensation, which was really still at its like apex when we first started recording the show. So kind of crazy that we're talking about it 3-4 years after it has dropped.
4 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody who has been conscious in America is aware of Hamilton to some extent, that it's the film by Lin-Manuel, or the play by Lin-Manuel Miranda. Really propelled him to stardom the last couple of years. And, I had never seen it, listened to some of the soundtrack. I know that you had seen it in Boston, I believe, with your mom, right?
That's correct. I had the tremendous privilege of winning the lottery in September 2018 at one of the touring stops in Boston. Funny enough, I had applied for the lottery during the thick of the Hamilton fever back in 2016. That summer, I want to say I put in for it maybe like 80 times or something. I don't know, basically every day that whole summer, which was kind of hilarious in hindsight because I still lived in Albany at the time, and I would have had to have, you find out if you win the lottery at 4 o'clock, you have to pick the tickets up by 7 p.m. for the 8 p.m. show, I believe is how it went. So I would have had to immediately jump out of my desk chair, leave work, speed down the interstate, park my car somewhere in like Harlem, probably just like I'd find a spot, take the train into Grand Central, then run over to Richard Rodgers Theater to pick those tickets up in a 3-hour window. It was a very unrealistic plan that never actually mattered in the end. But yeah, I won the lottery. And I will say one of the things that really stood out to me when seeing it live was the energy in the theater before it began. There was just this kind of crackling anticipation from everyone there, which I think is notable because with something like Hamilton that's been so hard to see and so cost prohibitive to see as well, that most people in any given show are seeing it for the first time, despite how famous this musical is. And there's just such anticipation. And then meanwhile, once you watch this musical, almost everyone there knows the words because they've heard this soundtrack for sometimes years at that point, right? Yep. And yet there was just such enthusiasm and energy. And you could feel that again in the intermission, which is longer than a minute, unlike the film version, of course. And, watching this film version of the play, obviously it's really cool to see the original cast, of course, whose voices everyone's familiar with from the album. But, seeing how that's different for me since I'd seen the film. But also seeing how film theater is different than seeing theater live, of course. I think the audio mix is a lot different, but on the more positive end, you get a more centralized camera angle. And I think from my limited experience with watching filmed stage plays, there was a lot better camera work for this Hamilton film than there is for most other instances of this, which was positive. I mean, what did you think? Because you had not seen the musical.
Yeah, the anticipation for it was obviously high. Like you talked about, that sensation really drew so much energy and buzz around it. It was the sort of thing where I felt like whenever I saw it, it probably could not live up to the hype it had been put to, but I was still incredibly impressed. And I've been listening to the soundtrack pretty much every day ever since, because I feel like not only is this a very unique performance, obviously they're doing hip hop like songs, a lot of songs that are in the same vein as things like A Tribe Called Quest, Biggie Smalls, that sort of like classic hip hop that Lin-Manuel Miranda has, given a nod to in a lot of interviews since. But if they didn't do it in these styles, if they sang in traditional, theater musical style, it's supposedly would be like a 4+ hour musical. So
it's a lot of words.
It's just a lot packed in. So I found it very engaging, and I think more than anything, I was just blown away by how much I liked the tertiary characters so much more than I liked the main characters. Like Leslie Odom Jr. as Burr is fantastic as the narrator, kind of like the propelling force throughout the storyteller throughout the play. And Lin-Manuel is pretty good as Hamilton. I think he's a better playwright and musical writer than he is performer in any sense, which I don't think is much of a hot take at this point, especially when he goes up against someone like Daveed Diggs, who is just absolutely electric in this. I mean, he won the Tony Award for his performance up against Leslie Odom and Chris Jackson.
It was Chris Jackson and Groff.
And Groff. Okay.
Odom also won beating Lynn.
Gotcha.
And then Renee Goldsberry, Angelica Schuyler, she won. And then Philippa Sue actually lost to Cynthia Erivo for her turn in The Color Purple. But yeah, that's 3 acting wins, plus they won Best Musical as well. I think 11 Tonys in total back in 2016.
Insane. And you actually just mentioned Groff, who I think has to be like the Dion Waiters Award of this play, right? Yeah. He comes in, I think he sings he sings for a total of like 6 minutes and 30 seconds the whole time. And he just steals the moment every time. He's absolutely electric, playing this like King George, who's like a sociopath and like this flat affect, but like, obviously like supposed to be like childish and spoiled, but also like ruling under a hard thumb. It's very engaging, and just kind of reminds you how talented this guy is, because the last time most of us engaged him, unless you saw Frozen 2, where he plays what?
You can skip that one.
Sven? I don't even remember the.
No. He's Kristoff, yeah.
But is Mindhunter, where he plays Holden Ford.
Of course.
Love Mindhunter. Go check out that review. When you watched the original cast, the Hamill film, who were you most taken by performance wise?
Yeah, it's a good question. I remember when I think listening to the soundtrack and then seeing it myself, I was always really blown away with the whole construction of the Burr character and how it affects the film. And I mean, Leslie Odom is just so great as well, but it was weird. He almost seemed more muted to me in the film. And I think that's just partially due to the mix, partially due to not being in the room when you're watching it. But it was kind of interesting to have him not jump out as much as he had in past exposure to it. But yeah, I think Daveed, it's funny because I think Daveed's turn as Lafayette and Jefferson is one of the most popular for the play, obviously. Yeah, I don't know if Jefferson has like any real signature songs or even signature like moments of like great singing, It's more this like Daveed is just this very handsome guy, very talented guy who happens to be a rapper, of course, that he just sells it in such a way. And the way Jefferson is written as this kind of pompous, rich trust fund kid, right? Like it's done in such a way that he almost transcends his part. And it's tough not to really be taken with Daveed's performance.
Yeah, it's interesting because he really, I think, has one of the strongest songs at near the back half of the first act with Guns and Ships, where he comes in as Lafayette and just is spitting 100 miles a minute and super charismatic. And then he starts off as Jefferson to start Act 2 with What Did I Miss? Right. And it really just like amazing moments that just steal those parts of the show, and you're just like, wow, that song really blew me away. And a lot of these songs you have that feeling afterwards, but those ones I felt like really stuck with me. I agree with you on Burr, which is interesting because I feel like Leslie Odom Jr.'s voice, when listening to just the soundtrack as I had before, really stands out as one of the strongest to me in terms of like classically trained voices, singing wise. But I felt like the only moment where I really felt like he was like projecting himself through, other than Dear Theodosia, which is a very sentimental and moving ballad, is the Adams administration, when he kind of like starts off and he comes across like so like angry and kind of like starting like the downfall of Hamilton there, so to speak. That's one of the moments I like really associate. But other than that, I didn't feel like he had a huge standout moment too much. So I agree with you.
I mean, it's in Wait For It's the signature Burr song, but that's obviously so early in the play. Yeah, honestly, I think my favorite Burr moment, which is the case once again with the film, but also the soundtrack, is Washington on Your Side in Act 2, which is not just Burr. But it's funny, like you mentioned What Did I Miss for Jefferson's introduction, and that's actually one of my favorite songs for what not really for what has to do with Jefferson at all, but so much about, it's one of those great examples of like the recurring motifs that I think make Hamilton so infectious and easy to love. It's Thomas Jefferson's Coming Home, as opposed to later we had the George Washington's Going Home. There's so many of these throughout the play. Just You Wait, and Talk Less, Smile More, and Never Be Satisfied, Look Around, all these, right? And I think that's one of my favorite moments. And that was another thing that I really enjoyed about the film, again, is being very familiar with everything. It's just like catching more of like the genius that is Hamilton and Lin's specific genius, and how he constructed the musical and having all these things kind of reoccur. And then you see how that mixes along with honestly very simple choreography and sparse set design, that the words and the songs are able to really transcend everything else around them because they're actually that good and that smart. And I think being able to see the film is a good way to look at that set design, look at that choreography, and see that it's not really that much going on, yet it's also all you really need. We'll look at like when they do Satisfied and the way they convey starts and stops in time and rewind, right? And again, with Stay Alive when Philip Hamilton's dying, and like the way that they pause and they have the rotating thing in the stage, right? It's like, it's all really simple stuff, but I think it all really works and keeps you both focused on the words and what is being conveyed without being too distracting. So yeah, I mean, it's notably the Hamilton soundtrack is number 2 in the country right now, 102,000 sales, which is its highest chart placement. And it has been on the charts for 250 weeks. It has not left since October 2015.
It's just an absolute force of a musical. I wanted to bring up 3 more things. First, I really like how this play subverted my expectations in terms of framing itself around these founding fathers who are obviously incredibly famous in our country, constantly referred back to in current
on
politics.
Our money.
Yep. And really, I think the people that come across as the true heroes, like the good people in this, are Angelica and Eliza Schuyler. They are the people who are good moral, the ones who are selfless, doing things for each other and not for their own gain. And that's really highlighted, I think, in Satisfied, which I think is probably the song of the soundtrack, in my opinion, and delivered at the best, in my opinion. But also Who Lives, Who Dies, Who Tells Your Story. The end with, obviously, Philippa Sue just absolutely crushing it. I wanted to ask you, how do you interpret that last gasp at the end by Philippa Sue? There's been a lot of discussion online about it.
Yeah, I honestly, I haven't given it too much thought, but I noticed that it's been a recurring bit of the discourse. It's interesting. I don't know if that was the case 4 years ago. I don't remember. I mean, what do you think?
One of the interesting theories I saw, and I think I buy into, is that gasp at the end is her, reaching the afterlife and seeing the play Hamilton. It's being performed, but it's showing that it's being performed because she told the story, and she was the one that did all this work to make this history known and really flesh out Hamilton's story in that way. And she's kind of seeing her life's work come to fruition, which is really interesting. I think especially because Lin's clothing or his jacket changes, and that's supposed to symbolize that he's now Lin-Manuel Miranda and not Hamilton character anymore. Thought that was really interesting. There's a lot of interpretation though, so definitely check that out online. And I guess one other thing I think we should mention as we're kind of critiquing, there's been a lot of critique about the portrayal of the founding fathers and founding father ideology in the play. And I wanted to just kind of hear your general thoughts about that. We don't need to get too deep, but especially in the time we're in, where do you stand with it?
No, I think that's actually been a very interesting thing to see play out, because Hamilton, by the very nature of when it came into being, is a product of the Obama era and espouses ideals in a certain way as a result. And you're seeing a lot of comments on it now really it came out in 2015. Most people didn't become aware of it till 2016, but 4+ years later, we're in a very different time. And there's been a lot of focus on the historicity of Hamilton. And I've always found that so interesting, because the educational value of Hamilton, I think, is pretty paramount. You can ask teachers about that. And that's always been, commented on right afterwards with the acknowledgement that Hamilton is not 100% accurate. Mm-hmm. And Hamilton is portraying flawed men. The founding fathers being flawed men is not by any stretch of the imagination a new idea or a new idea to the mainstream. I have a bachelor's in history, for those who don't know, and my capstone was literally about how the perception of the founding fathers has changed over time. Mm. This is very, very old ground. And it's just been really funny to me to see all these people, see some people really kind of come for Hamilton's neck and come for Lin, as if the aspirational nature of the play is somehow invalidating to the whole prospect, because Thomas Jefferson and Washington owned slaves, and that is barely touched upon in the play. Those are flaws. Sure, it's tough to really reckon with the good the flawed founders of our country did. When you have those negatives as well, it is a challenging subject, and I don't know how I could do it better. But it has been interesting to kind of see some of the relitigation around that.
Yeah. No, it's definitely interesting. And it's funny because I think when you watch this, the only one out of the founding fathers that I feel like really comes across almost like idealistic is George Washington. Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably because the story is being told from Hamilton's perspective, and Hamilton owed a lot to George Washington in terms of his status and him climbing. But I do think, it's hard to talk about this period. And Roger Ebert says this a lot better than I can in an interview, I think, from the 90s, when he's talking about it's hard to portray that time period, because in these stories, you look for people to be protagonists that you can get behind, you can root for. And if you really portrayed it accurately, you wouldn't root for any of these guys. Right. They all were doing horrible things, especially in the story. Like Hamilton is probably one of the most innocent, because he was only involved in the slave trading. He didn't actually own, but he helped his family buy and sell. And his wife advocated for freeing slaves afterwards. Hamilton was an advocate for it at the end of his life, and obviously was not in favor of owning them because he didn't himself. But still, these are guys that did horrible things, and they're flawed, a product of their time, but that doesn't absolve them.
And even Hamilton, he's portrayed as a flawed character in the musical, obviously, just not so much within the slave angle. And I think if there's anything people may gripe with, I think it's probably Washington, as you said, because when Washington's going home, one of my favorite songs, an amazing song, Christopher Jackson, the shining moment for the role, Washington doesn't free his slaves until after he dies, or Martha does it for him, right? Like, so he's still going back to the slave plantation in Mount Vernon, right? I don't know. That's how it went back then, But again, the value with Hamilton, I think, just from educational value, is like, this is a great way to examine the genius of the creation of our treasury under Hamilton. That is objectively a true thing, whether Hamilton sucked or not, So it just depends how you grapple with these things. But I found it very interesting to see this kind of thing be, in the mainstream again. Because it's not a convo people have all that often about historical things. I think it really just happened because Hamilton's just really so ubiquitous and has been capturing everyone's attention once again, thanks to Disney.
Well, we've talked about a 2016, 2015 play for 20 minutes. So maybe why don't we move on to some current pop culture? Um, check out Hamilton Disney Plus. Why don't we talk about 100 Gecs dropping 1,000 Gecs in the Tree of Clues?
What a title.
Yeah, like a remix album with some new songs added near the end, but obviously doing new versions with guests of their album 1000 Gecs from last year, 2019. And, uh, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the new songs because I think there's a couple of really cool remixes on here, but I wanted to also spend a little bit more time near the end because I think the new songs are interesting to talk about and a little bit more topical. All right, so let's start with the remixes. Which of these remixes or new versions of these songs really hit for you or stood out?
Yeah. 100 Gecs made my top 10 albums last year, as did their single Money Machine, which was remixed on this new album. And I think the things that people like about 100 Gecs and found refreshing and surprising and hard to comprehend at times about this duo is present once again with this remix album. And, in terms of this really abrasive, hard to classify electronic pop music, right? And a remix album, I don't know if we've ever even talked about a remix album before. It's usually not a proposition I care too much about. But 100 Gecs, due to the nature of how they make music, kind of similar, I guess, to the way Tonight has made a little bit of music. It's you never really know what's gonna happen, and then to get Injury Reserve and Fall Out Boy and Tommy Cash and who the fuck ever
Charlie
else,
XCX,
of course, who has always kind of been in the comms in terms of the production, but like you just kind of bring these voices in. You're like, wow, what could 100 Gecs do with that? And I think Money Machine, probably one of my, I don't really care for this. I think the original version is much better than this remix, just because we don't get like the do that's so pounding in the original song. So I don't really care for this remix with A.G. Cook. But Ringtone, I think, is a really interesting one, because the Ringtone song, Money Machine, Ringtone, and 745 Sticky are probably the more conventional, traditional song structures on 1,000 Gecs, and therefore probably most lending themselves most easily to a remix. But then you get two people that really like to bend boundaries a bit with Rico Nasty and especially Charlie XCX. I think that fits great, and it's actually better than the original Ringtone.
Totally agree. That was, like you said, Money Machine, probably the song by them I enjoyed the most. But this remix of Ringtone really stood out. Obviously, Charlie is, someone that she comes on and she immediately perks up. And same with Rico. So putting them on the track together, I want to hear more of them on tracks in the future. I really also enjoyed, for one of the new songs, it was 800 dB Cloud, the Rico Harbor remix. I thought that just was fucking excellent. Like I just really was engaged by that song.
That one's so interesting to me too, because the original version is just like traditional dubstep, which in terms of any mainstream coverage, you do not hear a lot of dubstep these days. That's more like the bowels of Beatport right now. So yeah, that also stood out to me, just because, again, very unlike just about anything else. I really like the 745 Sticky remix with Injury Reserve. Kind of weird, right, to have like real rapping with a Gecs song, yet I don't know, like when Richie just kind of comes in and it hits hard and it kind of transitions really to just them and like minimal production. But I like that a well. And of course, Groggs just passed away from Injury Reserve, so it was nice to hear him again. Yeah, man, and like the biggest surprise to me for sure had to be Fall Out Boy. Not so much their presence on this, but just that it was actually like really good.
Yeah,
and like
it fit so well together.
Yeah, I mean, who was it? That's Pete Wentz singing, right?
Yeah,
like that. I was really surprised that sounded great.
Yeah,
right?
No,
I forget who sings
Stump
it.
is the singer.
Oh, you're right. Wentz is
Stump is the singer. Yeah, Wentz is the guitar heartthrob. But honestly, I when I heard the track, I didn't see the Fall Out Boy was the one on it. So I like perked up and I was like, is this? And then I looked like Fall Out Boy, like it, just a crazy mix, but it worked out so well. Which of the new songs was your favorite or that stood out to you?
Yeah, Toothless.
Yeah,
Toothless hits.
mm-hmm.
And that's the thing about 100 Gecs. They don't need everything to hit. Dylan Brady, Laura Les, this eclectic duo. They don't need everything to hit. And I think by the nature of how they make music, not everything can. But when it does, it's just really fucking cool, man. So yeah. Toothless is one of those new ones for me.
Yeah, Toothless was the one that definitely stood out to me too. I also thought, just pulling back up here, I also thought Small Pipe was pretty good. Like, just one of the ones I enjoyed probably the most. I gotta be honest though, like 51 minutes of Gecs. If you're not big into Gecs, can be a lot of Gecs at once.
It's so interesting too because the original album is 10 songs, 23 minutes.
Yes,
and I get this remix album that's more than twice that in length. It's kind of funny.
It's a lot, but yeah, I think check this out. The remixes are cool, but the new stuff is definitely worth hearing. We added Toothless to our Nowstalgia Best of 2020, so follow that on Spotify. Why don't we move on to a band that dropped an album a year before 1000 Gecs, which is the Beths, who dropped Future Me Hates Me in 2018. One of my favorite albums of that year. Got a positive review from Dave, which is
really good.
For a rock album, hard to get. So I think that gives you a little bit of credence into how good that album was. Dave, did you feel like the second album, Jump Rope Gazers, is living up to the best, the usual quality?
No.
Why not?
No. Well, the first 3 songs are good. You know, it's like the first album. And then we get the traditional tale as old as time with indie rock.
Yeah.
And they're not really that much indie rock. They're kind of like power pop. But anyway, it's that classic thing that happens with the second album where they don't know what to do. You know, that first album, Future Me Hates Me, fucking hits because they have really tight hooks and they make really tight songs. Guitar is good. The drum's good. Elizabeth Stokes' vocals are really engaging. I think they're still engaging on the second album, but just like it's much moodier music a little bit, you know? And I was just really surprised to see them go in this direction because I just thought it was really fucking tight shit the first time around. So yeah, I don't hate it or anything. I just was disappointed because I feel like it was kind of a weird, turned down a different road a little bit towards the end of this track listing. But a song like Dying to Believe, track 2, that shit's fucking great. That sounds just like the first album.
Yep. Yeah. You know, it's interesting because the first album was just pacing wise so on level. And you think about the songs that were a little slower, like A River Run. That song, more downbeat for them, still has the same driving kind of like pace to it in terms of structure, in terms of the way that the rhymes are coming, and just the song is written. These are definitely a lot more like Elizabeth Stokes getting down to her feelings. And while I think she's an excellent songwriter, and I definitely think she's going to be delivering us songs that are meaningful and thought-provoking down the road. I think she got a little bit too in her feelings here. And I think the order of the songs almost felt a little bit just like off for me. You know, we talked about the same critique a little bit with the Lady Gaga album Chromatica a couple weeks ago. But you go from those first 3 songs, and then Jump Rope Gazers, you know, it starts to get a little bit more like, okay. And then you're really in your feelings. Do You Want Me Now is like, I'm pretty sure about her wanting her therapist, which is pretty interesting. But then like it kind of goes back up a little bit more with like Mars, the God of War, but You Are a Beam of Light and Just Shy of Shore, I feel like are pretty like lackadaisical way to end the album, which is just so disappointing because like you said, I've seen the Best live. That last album plays so well live. It's just energy after energy, and this just felt a lot more up and down. And I think they just really shine when they're bringing the heat fast and furious.
It's so interesting too because when they came out mainstream wise in 2018, they're just this unknown band from New Zealand with one EP to their name.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're delivering a sophomore album with the whole industry of indie rock's expectations now laid upon them, you know?
Yeah.
And they're not the first to make this mistake. They won't be the last. I think a lot of like Foster the People kind of taking a weird turn with Supermodel, you know?
I mean, even this year, talking about, I was going to say Cloud Nothings, but that's not what I was talking about. Will Toledo, you know, and
Car Seat, yeah.
Car Seat Headrest. I mean, that first album, Teens of Denial, fucking banger after banger, and then hard to recapture that magic. You know, it's tough. I think, especially when you think of indie rock and what really dominates the sphere, you know, we talked about Phoebe Bridgers, we talked about Soccer Mommy, and where they really thrive is with really sharp lyrics. Soccer Mommy, you know, brings in, I think, a little bit more energy and beat to her music than Phoebe does.
Melody.
Yeah, but those are like the top of it right now, and this could have been the best chance to really capture that scene, but I felt like they fell a little bit more into that style rather than continuing to carve out their own lane. So,
right. At the end of the day, there's no whatever, there's no happy unhappy on Jump Rope Gazers.
Well,
so
what were the songs you did like?
Dying to Believe, the
Dying
second
to
song, I thought was really good.
It's really
and
strong.
Those first three songs in general, I thought sounded good. I was like really engaged with the album, and then I, as we've said, started to lose me as we slowed down a bit.
Yeah, I really liked Mars, the God of War in the second half of the album too. I felt like that guitar solo at the end, I want to hear more of that in the Beths, because I felt like their other songs on the first album were just so tight, they didn't allow themselves to like expound at all or have those moments. So I'd like to hear them get a little bit more back to that first album sound with a little bit more of that like solo, letting them go a little wild as well. So disappointing, but I think we're still going to put one or two songs on to our playlist. Let's get to some albums that I don't think disappointed too much, and we'll start with Juice WRLD, talking about young people who were coming up into the scene, starting to dominate the scene. We've talked a lot about Juice WRLD, I feel like, for someone that was only 21 when they passed away in December of last year of an overdose. We talked about that in the pod when it happened, dropping this posthumous album, Legends Never Die.
1 week's notice. Came out of nowhere, really.
You know, I thought this was, for a posthumous album, which, you know, we always got to kind of like curb our critique with that, you know, that this is not the artist putting their fingerprint all over it. It's finished without them being all over it. I thought this was as good of a posthumous album gets. I thought Juice kind of shone through. I thought there was a lot to really take away and like. Obviously, there's a little bit of fat on it at times, and I think some things that were like unnecessary features, so to speak. But overall, pretty solid. And I think you kind of see what made Juice this up and coming star is that he really, I think, in terms of his sphere, like being that sing-songy rap, did it really well. How did you feel about this album, though?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I definitely felt like there was a lot of filler on here, and Legends Never Die never really changed my thoughts about Juice WRLD's music, because I don't think there's anything new on this and posthumous album. That's generally the expectation. I just had a bit of a different experience with Pop Smoke the week before. We'll get to that. But for Juice, I just felt, yeah, this is Juice doing what he does, right? This is that teen angst, that incredibly candid examination of one's mental health and desire to self-medicate to combat inner demons, right? That's still here. That's why Juice was so big and so famous, right? And I think where this album really shines is that, by the grace of God, there's actually some Juice lyrics that are able to really grapple with that directly, in terms of like when he literally says, "I know my lyrics saved you," right? And then you have that outro at the end where he's talking to his fans, right? And it's like kind of wild that he actually had these moments to capture and share with his fans, right? But I don't think I was really like wowed by any song per se, you know. You know, I don't think there's much here that you really hold up to like Death Race for Love or Goodbye and Good Riddance, you know. But, you know, songs like Stay High, that's Juice at his trappiest flows, you know, and
Mhm.
there's actually some interesting use of like drum production on this, which kind of gets to that more emo side of Juice that he kind
Mhm.
of dabbled with sonically, even if he always really gave rap flows on his songs. So, you know, it's interesting. I don't think I'm really going to go back to it all that much, but I think for his hardcore fans that are really, really taken with his death, I think there are really some moments that you know you're going to shed a tear to and really you know resonate with and reflect on that short but memorable ride that being a Juice World fan was.
Yeah. You know, I think in terms of a posthumous album, like you said, you want to feel like you get the artist's energy, that spirit through, and I think that happens on a decent amount of moments. Now, are those moments like top tier Juice World moments? Probably not. But I think like the first song, Anxiety, I thought Bad Energy, Wishing Well, I thought these were moments where it really felt like you were getting that Juice World spirit through his songs. And like you said, to have these kind of lyrics, these moments recorded to play and speak so directly to his themes that he's talked about, things that he went through,
Mm-hmm.
things that probably ultimately played a part into his untimely passing. It's kind of just like insane that this was kind of be able to put together and be as coherent as I think it
Right.
was. Yeah, and we're going to talk about Pop in a second. I think Pop's album is way better. But I still thought for this being posthumous, pretty impressive. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Now I was thinking, I think one of the moments that kind of stood out to me, just kind of superfluous moment, but on Stay High, is that I thought a really good quotable. I got that drip like gonna, I might drip or drown myself. I was like, ooh, Juice with the bars. I like that. Um, Now I think we have on this album a common sin with posthumous albums. That would be Come and Go with Marshmello. That is a very interesting song to me for what it might have maybe could have been if Juice was still here, right? That starts with like some solid drum kit work, right? And it's like Juice is kind of riding this, and it's kind of a different production for him. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And I started getting these vibes. Like, is this gonna be like Halsey's 3 a.m. or it's like this really throwback pop rock song? And Halsey's on this album. That's probably why I thought of it.
Mhm.
But then his lyrics start getting really distorted and Marshmello's drops come in a little heavier. And I'm like, fuck, you ruined it. And I wonder, maybe that they made this song the way they did because this is all they had. This was probably a snippet or something. And like they had to clean up the lyrics somehow, and that's the vocals somehow, and that's how they did it. That's kind of my guess. But I was like, man, that's like kind of like the potential for more that Juice left us with. I'm like, maybe that was it.
Mhm.
Who knows?
And if there's one man you want to put the hands of a posthumous album, it is definitely Marshmello. So
He's literally on here twice.
yeah, not great. All right. Any last thoughts before we wrap this one up? Move on to Pop.
Shout out my guy Polo G, obviously a Chicagoan like Juice. Cool to see them that they've never been on a song before. Um, yeah, but again, that's a very weird song. That's also a Marshmallow song. It's like you just kind of copy and pasted this pullovers, and because Polo G has a high floor, it sounds good. But again, kind of weird one. But I was actually surprised. I like that interlude song. What was it? The Man, the Myth, the Legend, where you got like was it Cole and Lil Dicky and people just kind of talking about their appreciation for Juice's technical ability as a freestyler. I'm like, wow, that's actually a really cool idea to like use interviews and stuff like that as an interlude. I like that. So this is interestingly, this album is currently at time of recording projected to do 400 to 440,000 first week sales, which depending on how high that does, it could beat The Weeknd for the biggest week of the year. The Weeknd did 444, and it's going to beat Uzi for biggest streaming week of the year. Kind of wild. And again, this came out with really no notice, only one single, and Righteous. It just shows you just how popular Juice WRLD is.
And this is an unfortunate transition into the next artist we're talking about, but another artist that passed away way too soon, only a couple of months after Juice WRLD in February. Pop Smoke.
Even younger than Juice WRLD.
Yeah, 20 years old. He was shot in a home invasion. Actually, just I think
Mhm.
this past week, 5 people were arrested in connection with this. So that I'm glad that
Yep.
there's hopefully some justice being brought for Pop Smoke. We've talked about him a lot because we've been talking about drill a lot, and
Mhm.
he was just that leader of that Brooklyn drill scene. That's really taking the zeitgeist right now in New York rap. And yeah, I think this album, which is executive produced by 50 Cent, who was basically Pop's mentor in a lot of ways,
Mhm.
or was becoming his mentor. Um, I think this album really shows what made Pop great. And it's interesting because I feel like at times he's able to really become melodic and really like craft just a really like nice song. Like I think there's like one love song near the back that I want to mention a little bit that really hits. But then there's also moments where he sounds like Rick Ross on this shit, and it just goes hard. And like the way he uses his voice to like go in between is just so impressive. How did you feel listening to "Shoot for the Stars, Aim for the Moon"?
Yeah, man, this album made me fucking really sad because it's just so fucking obvious what was lost with Pop Smoke, right?
Yeah.
As you said, we've talked about Brooklyn Drill. Pop was not the first star of the scene. 22Gs and Chef G came out before him and made noise before him. But Pop Smoke, due to that just undeniable charisma and presence on the mic, just immediately took it by storm. And as I said, as everyone said when he died, it was just clear that he was a superstar because he's going to transcend being a local legend and bringing Brooklyn to the world. And you kind of already started to see that happening, right? Because on the Jack Boys EP, you have Gotti, where Travis Scott brings Pop on a Axl beat to make a fucking Brooklyn song and have Travis do his shit on it afterwards, right? It's like you could see it happening, you could see it coming. And I think the comp to him is truly 50 Cent. I think everyone thought that before he died, and it's even more obvious now after some of the new songs we get on this posthumous record. Um, and it's just fucking sucks because it just feels like a real loss. And it's weird. Now, as a posthumous album, this is actually quite different than Juice WRLD because there's a lot of features on. There are 14 features on this album, and most of them are not New Yorkers, right? And it's interesting. It's like that's clearly was done because they didn't have enough for those songs, those verses to make it, so they threw on, features. And it's an A-list mainstream list of features, right? Quavo, Roddy, Future, fucking Tyga, DaBaby, Lil Baby, right? It's Sway Lee. It's a who's who, more or less. But that, to me, was really disappointing because you're kind of drowning out Pop Smoke on his own album at times.
Yeah.
But there are some fucking really shining moments that you see on this, and you can tell that he had a lot more to give and a lot more ground to lay as a rapper. And that's why I'm just so bummed about it, because you can fucking see it. He had these unreleased songs that weren't even done, and you're like, fuck, he's gonna flip To Me Is Into You, like he's Fab. Oh, he's literally gonna sample Many Men by 50 because he's literally the next 50 Cent. Like, he did it all. You have a fucking reggaeton song with Karol G and it sounds great.
Yep.
Like, there's so much good shit on here. Gangstas is literally just a 50 Cent song. It's fucking awesome, So there's a lot. I've been listening to it a lot, despite the fact there's also a lot of fucking fat on it.
Yeah, you already alluded to something special, which I think it just, what a moment, like you said, to flip into you and kind of ride on that. And then I just feel like, I mean, not every song hits. There's a lot of fat, like you mentioned, a lot of features, and some of them hit, some of them don't. I actually thought Snitching with Quavo and Future was a fairly like strong song for Future, which it was interesting. And I felt like Quavo also had a decent performance, which is, not something I say about Quavo a lot recently, unfortunately. But I felt like 44 Bulldog was a really strong song.
Yeah.
Really displaying, I think, what made Pop so great.
Yeah, that's classic Brooklyn drill right there. It was great to hear one of those because a lot of these other beats are not drill beats.
Yeah. I also really liked the back half of the album a lot. You get Something Special. What You Know About Love is like, how does Pop Smoke make a love song?
Sampling Genuine's
Yes.
differences.
Just
awesome.
Yeah.
And then to the 50 Cent comps, you think of something like 21 Questions.
Yeah.
You know, it's right there.
And then you mentioned the King Combs, obviously. Yeah.
What the fuck is this? Why is he here?
Yeah.
We just talked about a King Combs feature. What the fuck, man? I'm sure he's, as Alphonse Pierre and Pitchfork said, I'm sure he's a great time and he pays for dinner. But like, come on. Of all the features, I mean, geez, you couldn't have given 5 Foreign a fucking look.
Yeah.
Another little TJ, someone he's at least worked with. Come on.
Yeah. I mean, we definitely needed to get Tyga and Quavo on here twice. I mean, if we didn't, if we didn't, how could we even drop this album?
And you know what's so funny about that? I actually think Tyga sounds fine for like the honcho on my West Coast shit, as Quavo puts it, right? It's like, it sounds fine, but it's like, this is a fucking Tyga song. I didn't need to hear this on the Pop Smoke album. Tyga, you get to save this. You know, that one's tough for me. That was tough for me. But you know, Quavo being on here 3 times, well, you know, they made Shake the Room together when Pop was still alive. That's one of his hits, you know?
Yeah.
So I get it. They actually worked together. But it's like, you know, I think you got to think about it a little bit deeper. That's all.
Any songs other than the ones we mentioned that you really liked or that you've been playing back a lot?
I think it's quite notable that Dior is on here at the end.
Yeah.
Dior was also on both of his mixtapes. That's 3 for 3.
Get it back on the Billboard Top 100.
And it's funny because you can read about this. Dior became a bit of a rallying cry at Black Lives Matter protests in New York. Protesters were just singing it a cappella out loud together as they were marching. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of interesting. But that's kind of like the song of right now for Pop Smoke, which is funny because, again, it's kind of old. It's like his second big hit. So, you know, if there's another posthumous album, make sure Dior is on there as well.
But just keep dropping it.
Yeah. Well, I think we also, because it's related, we should talk about there's probably a deluxe album coming for this. We know of some other songs. One of them that may or may not be on there would be Paranoia with Gunna, Young Thug, and Pusha T. And we have that Pusha T verse where some strays are being thrown at Drake's ways. And by strays, I mean they were aimed at Drake. That's a very clear diss. I think it actually brought up a very interesting conversation about rap, right? You have people talking about the timeliness of it, but also the presence of personal beef on a posthumous record. I think it's kind of an interesting thing.
I mean, do you feel like that's appropriate to be bringing your own beef to an album about honoring someone that died?
Right, and that's what's been kind of weird to me about it, because the other person that put this album together with 50 Cent would be Steven Victor, who is the manager of Pop Smoke and also the manager of Pusha T. So I wonder if there's a bit of a conflict of interest with that. But yeah, like Pusha doesn't do a lot of features, right? So he kind of like responds when he pleases, right? Like he didn't respond to Drake or talk about Drake until, Infrared, when he finally made Daytona, right? Like Pusha's been fine to take his time. I have no problem with taking his time. There's no statute of limitations with this shit.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Thug might have been a little bit right in terms of like, can we just do this? Like, just put out a single, man. All your fans will hear it still. You don't have to ride this for any reason. So I don't know. It felt like interesting timing. Then again, it did leak a few days before it blew up. It didn't seem like anyone cared about it in a negative way until Drake decided allegedly to make sure it didn't come out officially. So it's like, I don't know. I actually don't know how controversial it might have actually been had the Drake part of it not happened. I don't know.
Yeah, it's the sort of thing where on the one hand, I can understand the perspective of, you don't want to bring your own personal beef onto the record for this person, honoring this person that died. On the other hand, I think if it did drop and it was taking shots at Drake, it's going to get a lot more looks than it probably normally would. And if anything, that's going to bring more people to listen to other Pop Smoke songs. And maybe that's actually the best way to honor, in a sense. Beef always drives clicks and views unless it's corny as hell. And Pusha and Drake, I don't think that's played out yet.
No, which is good. Is good. I'm happy for that.
Something to talk about.
And Pop Smoke, this album, I think did 251,000 first week, the 6th best album week of 2020, soon 7th after Juice, and was at the time only the third biggest hip hop album behind Eminem and Uzi, and now 4th with Juice. But kind of wild to see all that attention for him after he died. Right? I don't think he did pass like 50 for Meet the Woo 2.
Mm-hmm.
And funny enough, you know who had a nice comment about this? Got to give him credit. Fucking Tekashi 6ix9ine was like, why wasn't he doing 250 when he was alive? Why are you doing this when he's dead? You know what, 6ix9ine? You're right. You're right. A lot of people were not paying attention. Anyone who knew Pop was fucking fire. You know, a lot more people didn't know till he died, unfortunately.
Well, why don't we move on to some movies now, Dave? We have 2 pretty good movies to talk about today, starting with The Old Guard.
Pretty good.
The Gina Prince Bythewood new movie. This is known for
Basketball too with Charlize.
Yep, and Secret Life of Bees 2. Charlize, the old guard of the Secret Life. Yeah, this is interesting, right? So, I mean, going into this movie, what was I really aware of? That there was an action movie with Charlize Theron. I wasn't really aware of like superhero undertones to this. Wasn't really aware of any of the themes to this. I knew Kiki Lane was in it. And I was like, oh, liked her in Beale Street. Probably gonna like her in this. Let's check it out. And I left being like, you know, for a Netflix movie, and I'm kind of like couching it with that. Pretty good action movie, you know, and an entertaining plot. You know, so I was left satisfied. Which for a Netflix movie, other than like The Five Bloods, we don't get that often. So I'll
rare.
Yeah. How did you feel about The Old Guard?
Yeah, man, it's been really interesting. There was a lot of discourse this weekend about if people are naturally qualifying and lending more rope to films because they are straight to streaming. Mm-hmm. And also that's amplified because of quarantine and the lack of other options in theaters, right?
Right.
And I think a lot of people, and we do it too, we do levy expectations according to the way we're watching it. And Netflix films have a reputation of being not consistent in quality and usually on the cheaper end, unless it's something obviously made by an auteur like we just got with Spike or last year with Baumbach and, you know, Cuarón and all that, and Scorsese. So like it depends, right? But for The Old Guard, you know, I think the plot, I like the plot as well, but the plot is not like anything out of this world. I think it's actually one of the weaker elements because it's just kind of predictable and down the middle. But I think the way the film is made, and you know, it's an adaptation of a relatively new comic. There's like just human moments in the way this movie the story is told, and when you have that around, you know, kind of supernatural powers, superheroes, if you will, it seems to go a long way because we don't get a lot of that in the big budget superhero movies we all go and see when they come out. You know,
no.
And I think that's what kind of stood out to me. It's like it felt more lived in than a lot of the other superhero movies. And you know, again, that's despite the fact that we have a plot that's familiar. We literally have these characters all familiar. They all fucking Wolverine. That's their power, right? They can't be killed, right? Or they don't stay dead, I think is the better way to put it, right? It's like we get it. There's nothing new there, but
everything living dies.
Yeah, I liked it. I was surprised.
You know, I agree. The plot isn't mind-blowing, pretty especially for like an origin story type thing, which I don't know if you can, I guess you can qualify this as like the Kiki Lane Niles character origin story, not really the rest of them. And maybe that's an interesting thing. We'll get like a spin-off show about them or something like that. You know, who knows?
They set it up for a sequel
for sure. But I thought the sci-fi elements and the superhero elements were pretty engaging when it first kind of like when you find out that these people are thousands of years old. I thought they were really like fucking with her, the Niles character, and then like when you find out that they're serious, like I had a big eye roll at first, and then I was like, actually, you know, I kind of dig this. Like I kind of like that they come from different eras. They talk about like loneliness and like the burden of doing these things, and they also, you know, I think really flesh out, and the Chiwetel Ejiofor character really does a good job of doing this, really flesh out them as well-rounded characters that they do a lot of good and also some really awful things. That Kiki Lane's character was kind of opposed to and
Kill a
drove
lot
some
of
of the
people.
conflict. Yes, kill a lot of people, and sometimes people that maybe don't deserve to die. But in the end, the action is really good. Charlize Theron, I think this solidifies her as just the most bankable action star in the world in the last 3 years, which is just insane. Like
her and Cruise, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, if you had told me like 10 years ago Charlize Theron was going to be an action star, like the most bankable one in the world, I would have laughed at you. She was just a really beautiful woman.
It was a shit bet back then because Aeon Flux failed.
Yeah.
And she got a second chance with Mad Max, and then Atomic Blonde followed that. Yeah, I did like the action. I thought the choreography was actually pretty cool. Towards the end, you have that one where it kind of focuses on them reloading their guns and getting more ammo off the guys they killed and passing mags to each other. And it's like, again, kind of simple, but a lot of action movies don't actually show that shit. You're just supposed to assume that they got more ammo and they don't have an infinite mag, right? So again, I kind of like that sensibility. And the powers, I like that. Like they're not like overwhelming characters, right? It's like what happens to Theron and the first immortal she meets is she gets fucking dropped in the ocean because she's a witch, and she actually couldn't beat that circumstance for a very long time until the end of the movie. And it's like, oh wow, that's actually really compelling that like you have this like all these great gifts, but you're still kind of hamstrung by the technology and knowledge of the rest of the world.
Right.
On the other hand, once we learn about this, and we know that the one guy, there's the two other guys are from the Crusades, and the other guys died with Napoleon, and it's like, really cool. I wish we had an X-Men Origins Wolverine montage where we see them in the past doing shit, like when we see Logan and Sabretooth fighting in all the American wars. I was like, oh, that's a really cool touch, And like we get just a taste of it, right? When the like Charlie's character, like, wait, Rodin? What? And it's like, wait, I want to know who else you fucking know. I don't want Chicho Ejiofor to show me on a board all the cool shit you do. I want to see you influencing history. That's not a new thing, but it's fucking cool, So I hope there's a lot more flashbacks like that in the sequel. And when I watched this on Saturday, it was the number 1 on the Netflix top 10. So I hope it's getting enough views to warrant just said sequel.
Yeah, there's I think a lot to just kind of like dig into about aspects of the movie, because I don't think this is a perfect movie in any sense. We've already kind of mentioned some of the critiques. One I have is the soundtrack. Beyond maybe like 3 songs, you get a Frank song, I think you get Godspeed, you get an El King song, but then you get just like this generic EDM over almost every single fight scene. And I was kind of like, man, I wish that they had just gone with like a regular score for this almost, or even just like let the sound just like play for itself, because the action was so badass. But sometimes when you have like a huge marshmallow drop just coming over it, I'm just like, okay, it's taking me out a bit. But I think there's a lot more good with this than bad, and this is definitely a win for Netflix for sure.
Did you recognize the actor who plays the villain, the very very familiar archetypal bad CEO villain?
Harry Melling? No, I didn't recognize him.
Matt Smith looking ass. That is the same guy who played Dudley Dursley in Harry Potter.
Wow. Really thinned out. Good for him. When I think of Dudley, I just think of the the chubby one, I guess.
Eating all the cake in the corner.
Yep, really phased out of the later movies. Interesting. We're gonna talk about Palm Springs in a second. There's that actor that I wanted to see if you could recognize too. But any last thoughts on Olgar before we move on?
Kiki Lane. Yeah. She's real good. I was curious to see what's next. She's a bit of a late bloomer as far as young actors go, but she's already 28 and really only 2 big roles between this and Beale Street. But she's a really talented performer, and I think she really helps ground some of those more human moments in the story because of her talent as an actress, like Charlize. And they, that kind of talent just naturally elevates material. So looking forward to what's next for her.
Yep, absolutely. Speaking of real good, Andy Samberg, in my opinion, has become one of the most bankable comedy actors out there, and that's never more evident than in Palm Springs, which premiered at the Sundance Film Festival last year in 2019. Got a lot of buzz.
Wait,
Hulu.
wasn't it this year? That was this year.
Was it this year?
No, it was this year. Yeah.
Sold
for a lot.
2020 Sundance. 17.5 million, the most subscription service or anyone's ever paid for a movie straight out of Sundance. And only by like 69 cents, which is pretty funny that it beat the record for that much. Probably intentional. The debut from...
Definitely intentional.
Yes, from Max Barkakow, starring obviously Andy Samberg and Kristen Milioti. Really like a Groundhog Day type sci-fi romantic comedy.
Right. Repeating the same day over and over again. Groundhog Day, Russian Doll, Edge of Tomorrow. Not a new premise, but I think a good premise still when done well like this.
I went into this movie similar to Old Guard, pretty blind. I think I knew Andy Samberg was in it. I recognized Kristen Milioti as
Fargo.
Well, Fargo, but more so to me, she's always the mother from How I Met Your Mother, which is definitely not something that you want to be known as, because that character gets like shit on a lot. Just that show ending gets shit on a lot. This movie was just a delight. Maybe top 3, top 2 favorite movie for me for this year. Just found it really really wonderful. Laugh out loud moments, really thoughtful, meaningful moments. And it's amazing that Andy Samberg originally wrote this in film school, and it wasn't what it is now. It developed and has come a long way. But you think this is probably like a 10, maybe 15-year-old script at this point that finally got made. Pretty impressive. How did you feel about Palm Springs?
Yes, I did like it a lot. I think it has a lot of refreshing moments regarding the not new premise of the Groundhog Day, right?
Yeah.
And that's cool. I think what I liked the most about it is they kind of split up kind of the archetypes that we have with the Groundhog Day, right? It's like Andy Samberg is like Emily Blunt in Edge of Tomorrow. She knows the deal. She's experienced. She can tell you what's going on. And Kristen Milioti's more like the Tom Cruise. Like, well, I just got thrown in this, right? But you also we kind of skip the experiences for the first time because you already have the veteran character, right? It's kind of evolved past what happens with Bill Murray. And you get to see Milioti go through the ringer with it and lose her mind and then accept it and do all the fun, crazy shit, right? And I kind of liked how they kind of flipped around some of the familiar character archetypes we associate with the Groundhog Day premise. And when you have 2 really likable leads, you have a really I think a really enjoyable setting for the Groundhog Day, right? Think of Russian Doll. It always starts with that party, that house party, and it's like such a New York vibe. With this, you're at this wedding, destination wedding, and you have all these other characters around you, and it's like, oh, I really like this. I'm really down to see this repeat a lot.
Yeah,
it has all the things you want with a Groundhog Day premise, and you don't really need to know how the fucking cave works. It's like, okay, cool. She learns of quantum physics at the end. They fixed it. Whatever. I like watching this, and I like watching J.K. Simmons fucking pull up with the archery a little bit. It's so easy.
I thought I smelled you.
So easy to comprehend, but it still kind of feels really fresh.
Yeah,
and it's also hilarious. It's like, I'm not a Puritan. It's good shit.
Yeah, the thing with Groundhog Day, and I actually watched Groundhog Day this year.
It's on Netflix.
To me, it's a really good movie. I think when it's best is when it's Bill Murray just like trying things, doing ridiculous things. I think when it gets really dark is when it's kind of lags for me a little bit. And I think the thing about this movie is it kind of already gets past like the darkest part where Andy Samberg tried to kill himself thousands of times, basically. And Kristen Milioti kind of goes through that, but Samberg as like the guiding is like, it's not going to happen. And when you do see her try to do like the things that will get her killed, it's always just done quick and funny. And Andy Samberg's like, oh, just bracing for a
Take
quick
off
death.
the seatbelt. We'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's done in like a lighthearted way, so you're never really sitting with like the heavy feelings. And then they just had great chemistry. Like you really buy into their relationship. You buy into Samberg as this like lazy shitbag, basically, who's like kind of a nobody, seems like just kind of like over life, and after living the same day however many times, probably makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have Kristen Milioti as this kind of like fuck up, black sheep daughter, whose family just kind of expects her to always be doing the wrong thing. And in a sense, the day starts with her reliving probably one of the most shameful moments of her life over and over. And seeing how they kind of come together and find this like ability to like move forward together. It kind of is a comment on when you feel really stuck in your life, having the right people around you, whether that's a partner or a friend or someone that can, kind of help you through that, is really, really important and meaningful. Mm-hmm. But man, so many moments of this I just found laugh out loud funny. Like we already kind of mentioned two of them. J.K. Simmons comes in, has a great like bit part. I thought like when they were kind of like testing out some of the deaths was pretty funny. I loved the dance scene where they go into that bar, and they just are like ridiculously dancing. I don't remember what song it was, but that scene has been going all over Twitter. Just absolutely hilarious. I watch it every time I see it.
I like how Niles has to be like Misty's boyfriend. Like no one has anything to do who the fuck he is at the wedding.
Yeah, every single time. I also like how he just like shows up in her room and with like the parents and is like, kind of like talk about things. Also, when he's going over like all the people he hooked up with, and he mentions her dad, and it shows him like Peter Gallagher. Like, what are we doing? Like, it's just like hilarious.
I mean, that's always the cool shit too. It's like I like when like you get the fantasy, right? It's like, oh yeah, I had sex with everyone. That's right. And then he also is like, oh, I tried everything. One time I did all this crystal and got all the way to Equatorial Guinea, and then the doctors wouldn't let me sleep. They kept me alive, and that was not good. And it's like all these different ways to think about it. And I think it often brings other people who's like, how would I handle never being able to escape one day? And it's like I feel like most people just devolve to just kind of doing some kind of Grand Theft Auto action, right? You're either going to kill a lot of people, you're going to fuck a lot of people, some combination,
Yeah, for sure. And I also like how they kind of laid out the rules of this, right? That like even though the day is going to restart, the people in that moment still experience pain. So like when she like hits J.K. Simmons with the car, the ethics of it is really like I think expounded upon like a really interesting way. And then I also think it's kind of cool that like when they move apart and the reasons they do, I think it makes sense. But I also think it's great that it's not just like Kristen Milioti's character is like, I'm never coming back. She's like, I'm gonna go figure this shit out so I don't have to deal with you anymore, but I'm still gonna like bring you along with me. So it's not like a petty way. You're not like, man, fuck this chick. You're like, oh, this makes sense. And it's awesome that she teaches herself and figures it out.
Right.
Also really funny at the ending when they're laying in the pool and like, well, what should we do now? He's like, I should go get my dog. Like, you have a dog? It never came up. Like, I just thought that was like a really funny like way to end it and just kind of like comment on relationships. So a lot to love about this movie. Definitely gonna rewatch it for sure. It's an easy watch too, like hour 40 something like that. So quick watch.
Yeah, it's an interesting one to me too, because you think about Andy Samberg's career as a movie star, pop star, Never Stopping, was really well liked, but that bombed tremendously at the box office. And this is his first, lead movie like that since. And when it sells out of Sundance and Neon buys it, and I believe, I'm not positive, I'm pretty sure Neon like immediately marked this for Hulu, which they have that agreement with. And I'm curious if Andy Samberg might kind of become a king of streaming in a certain sense when it comes to films, because there's clearly an appetite for his movies, even if he probably cannot get people to actually show up to the movie theater under normal circumstances. So something to watch.
No, absolutely. So I know that you did not watch I Think You Should Leave, so you would not know this character, but Connor O'Malley plays one of the friends at the wedding I can't
Doing cocaine.
remember. Yeah, he's like the crazy one in like the room when they're having the bachelor party the night before, and he is a guy, and I think you should leave, who's like honk when you're horny, and he just follows the guy with the bumper sticker around honking constantly. One of my favorite skits from the whole thing. And if anyone's watched that show, is one of my favorite of the year. Just a really funny like through line. He's also married to Adie Bryant from SNL. And he like his friends with Seth Meyers. He was like a Vine star, so there's like a lot of like connection to him.
Cool. Funny people staying together. Like it.
Absolutely. Any last thoughts on Palm Springs?
No, it's like the Old Guard. It's one of those movies that seems to have captured a week in a unique way and actually spurred a lot more discourse than it probably would have under normal circumstances. So I guess that's a positive of quarantine, quarantine content. So that's cool. And it's worth it. It's a good movie.
What do we got for next week, Dave?
So on Wednesday, July 15th, Peacock launches. Alas, yet another streaming service is here. Woo! NBC Universal's. Mm-hmm. I am interested to see what's up with Brave New World, which is the famous sci-fi adaptation launching on the service. It has Alden Ehrenreich in it, who it's probably a good time to buy his stock. It might be a little low after Solo underperformed, but he's still a really good actor. So I'm going to at least check that out because, that's another one of those attempts to replicate Game of Thrones. And obviously it won't be that, but if it's cool, it's good enough for me. Other than that, there is just a little bit of music coming out. We have Ellie Goulding's new album, first one in a while. We have Kyle's new album. I really like some of his early singles. We have the Dixie Chicks, or should I say the Chicks?
The Chicks.
Comeback album. And also Black Bear, who white girls like. So that's a fair amount of stuff. And it's also, there's been a fair amount of VOD movies as well. You have The Truth from Coriata. It's been on VOD. Well, I still need to get to that. Greyhound with Tom Hanks came out on Apple TV Plus this past weekend. So we still have
Vast of Night, which I watched.
Okay. We're going to talk about Vast of Night next weekend, which is on Amazon Prime. You can watch that right now. It's supposed to be very good. I haven't seen it yet.
We'll definitely talk about that.
We're doing good still.
The content gods giveth for another week, Dave. Follow us at NowstalgiaPod on Twitter, soundcloud.com/NowstalgiaPod. And if you're watching this on YouTube, click that subscribe button or go to youtube.com/NowstalgiaPod. Support the pod in that way. And don't vote for Kanye, no matter what Chance says.
Don't listen to Chance.
We'll see you next week.